Hello, world. On this episode of Kicked in the Junk, I get to have a great discussion with the host of the Audaciously Aligned podcast, Alexis Diamond. Alexis, for the first time ever, is actually opening up to how she was raised and how extreme the environment was. This environment is so extreme that most people would break or just get stuck in this environment and never be able to move out of it or move past it. We learn how she was able to do that and how this was able to shape her the person she is today and how grateful she is for this. Again, one of my favorite discussions I think we've had so far on this podcast, and I really hope you enjoy. So please like, comment, and share, as I know it always helps to grow the podcast and what we're doing here. And if you're at a point in your life where you are feeling like you need some accountability, or maybe you are recognizing you're having these limiting beliefs that keep popping up in your life, I'd encourage you to reach out to us at the Life Purposely team. So lifepurposely.ca for your free 30-minute discovery call to see how we can help. On top of that, we'd also like to offer you our 8-week meditation workshop. It's going to be an online workshop once a week for 30 minutes. We're going to learn how to meditate, the ins and outs. It's going to be very basic, but there's not going to be any, you don't need to be chanting or gongs or incense, none of that. It's just something very simple that anybody can do anywhere and can have such a drastic impact on your life and bring out the best version of you. So I hope to see you at the workshop. It starts May 18th. So without further ado, here is our interview with Alexis Diamond. Awesome. All right. Hey, Alexa. So thank you so much. Alexa, sorry. Thank you so much for being on my show. I really appreciate you taking time into your day to be here. I know our last conversation was super awesome. I was actually super inspired from it, from me being on your podcast. So I really appreciate you being here. And I know we chatted a little bit about some of how you grew up and the struggles with that. And now how you learned from that and how that's actually been, looked at now with a lot of wisdom. So I know I can relate to that because I did grow up in there was 9 of us in my house at the time, 2 parents, 7 kids,
Yeah.
1 income, right? Like, my parents did their best and they definitely, I know they loved us and they tried to, do their best with a lot of things, but we definitely were lacking, especially growing up where we are. But your scenario sounds just, a little bit different and maybe other people can relate to that. So yeah, why don't you just share what was it like growing up and where it was and all that kind of all the fun stuff there.
Yeah, for sure. It's interesting, right? Because I was thinking about it this morning and I've created public content for like 3 years now, and I've literally never told this story. Like I've alluded to
Oh,
it. Yeah,
okay.
I've alluded to it, but I've never actually walked through it, I
Oh,
guess.
perfect. So I'm the first one. I
So
get to hear it
right,
firsthand.
right. So
Yes.
it's gonna be coming out here for the first time.
I love it.
So yeah, essentially, I'm the oldest, and well, I'm the only child that my mom and my biological dad have together.
Okay.
So my mom was 15 when both my parents were 15 when my mom got pregnant with me, and my dad is actually an immigrant. So my dad moved here from Ecuador. So at the time he was not a citizen. Um, so all the things that you expect to come with like a teenage pregnancy, all of the
Right.
immaturity and the family drama and the things around that, of course, were going on. But on top of that, I don't know necessarily what type of trauma may have happened to my mom, but I can tell from her behavior throughout my life that there was something deeper that she was dealing with. So
Mhm.
I was born when they were 16.
Wow.
And so they got married. My biological dad joined the Air Force because, like I said, he wasn't a citizen. So, in order for him to be able to qualify for any scholarships or anything like that with college, that's how he became a citizen. So,
Right. Yep.
he joined the Air Force, and of course, that requires leaving and traveling. And my mom was still a teenager and was doing teenager things. And long story short, that relationship did not work. It very
Yep.
quickly, that relationship did not work. And they ended up splitting up.
Mhm.
And that's kind of where the stories that I hear about my early childhood start, like
Right.
the real chaos starts. So after she left him, obviously he still wasn't around because he was in the Air Force now, right? He was traveling, and she got into her first real abusive relationship.
Oh, wow. So how old
Um,
is she when that happened?
I was 2, so she
Oh,
was
okay. She's been
18.
18. Wow.
Yeah.
So just second marriage or
Yeah.
second, I
Well,
guess.
she wasn't even, yeah,
Oh,
we'll get to the second marriage.
okay. Oh, sorry. There's
Yeah.
more going.
We weren't even there
I'm already,
yet.
I'm already so intrigued because again, I was a dad at 20
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of pressure. Like, you got to
Yeah.
feed, so can imagine at 16, right? Like,
Yeah.
how, that's a lot. So, and looking back at it now, that pressure does affect the kids
Oh,
because you don't want it to, and you do your best and all this stuff. You're still growing up. So,
yeah.
you don't realize that when you're that age, your parents are growing up in front of you. So anyway,
Mm-hmm.
continue. Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. So she got into her first abusive relationship, first suicide attempt. And
Oh,
that was all like I said, this isn't necessarily something I remember, but as I've gone through the healing work, like I can see that these were things that I was like bitter about, especially as a mom. It's like as a mom,
mhm.
like how do you put your child in that situation,
Yeah.
especially when it's not even the biological parent? Like there were a lot of things I was really bitter about with that. So essentially, that eventually fizzled out after her suicide attempt. And shortly after that was when she met my stepdad.
Okay.
And my stepdad was is a drug addict, addict of many things,
Right.
high school dropout, had like just gotten out of jail. Like my Mima, so his mom had actually sent him to Allentown to Pennsylvania to chill out, right? Because my
Wow.
dad's he's from Puerto Rico,
Yeah.
but he was raised in the Bronx.
Okay.
So she's like, maybe if we get him away from this, like he'll stop the drama. And that's when he met my mom. And 3 months later, they got married.
Wow.
So she was in her second marriage right around the time I was 3.
Wow. So
Um,
she'd been 19
yeah,
in a
still
second
a
marriage.
teenager, still a
Oh my God.
teenager. Yeah.
Okay.
So shortly after that, my grandfather passed away really early from a heart attack, and I know that hit her really hard, and probably kind of drove her deeper into things with my stepdad. But my biological dad actually ended up signing over his rights, and my
Mm.
stepdad adopted me.
Okay.
Um, and after that, shortly after that, my brothers were born. So fast forward, like my mom's 21 and there's 3 of us.
Holy.
Um, and that's when my memories start kicking in of the
Okay.
things that were happening and what was going on and kind of how unstable things were. Now, of course, at the time when you're a child, like you look at an adult and you're like, this is an old person,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like I'm not looking at that like, oh, she's 21 now. He was almost 30, right? He's a good
Mhm.
8 years older, but I wasn't looking at it from
Right.
that
Yeah.
lens. So like I said, there were a lot of drugs. There was
Mm.
a lot of abuse. There was a lot of physical fighting. And I mean, there were even
Wow.
times where like my dad, my stepdad, but my dad would bring us to drug deals
Oh
um
my God.
so that we could lie to our mom and say we were doing something else so that he didn't get caught going to drug deals. So that went on for a few years, and I remember
Wow.
distinctly, like, the cops coming, and I mean, their physical fights were bad. Things were like the neighbors always called the cops because that's just
Whoa.
how crazy it got. I mean, like, just crazy drama, with that whole situation, like, always moving, right? Because
Right.
we were always getting kicked out because my dad's an addict, right?
Right.
And they say that, like, for some people, like when you experience massive trauma, like you kind of stop maturing at that age. And I feel
Mhm.
like for my mom, like even from a really young age, I was like, I think you should be more adult here. I was like,
That's
I was like,
terrible.
I think I kind of understand what's going on here
Something's
more than you
missing.
do. Yeah, yeah. Like
So,
something's not connecting.
to take just a pause just for a second, was there any, there's a lot going on there.
Yeah.
And was there a few moments or times you can think of now? Because, I think of stuff when I was a kid, and at the time you're like, oh, it is what it is. You don't
Hmm.
know any better. You're a kid. Now to look at it and you go, yeah, that was pretty rough. Like that wasn't right. There was something off there.
Yeah.
Was there any scenarios that you can think of right now that were like, a couple scenarios that were like, yeah, this was not like, this was way off. Like you said, the drug deal thing. So that's,
Hmm.
that's pretty messed up. Is there any other scenarios that came up that you could think of?
So, to be completely honest, in retrospect, I knew that things weren't right. Like
Okay.
from like a really early age. And I think that that's kind of like where my gift had been through the whole thing, and kind of
Right.
like where like things ended up differently for me, where they might have ended up, for a lot of people in that situation. I think it's
Mhm.
because I was always like, this is not like a normal household. This is not like a normal family. And I'll never forget when I was fifth grade,
Yeah.
my parents had like a hobby for guns, right?
Sure. Yeah.
So they were getting into like this huge fight downstairs because I told my mom that my dad brought me to a drug deal. So they're downstairs fighting, not because he brought me to the drug deal, because he did drugs and lied to her about it. Right. So
Right.
there's that whole thing to begin with. Like,
Wow.
I remember growing up, I very much thought that, like, and that's a perspective thing, right? Like growing up, I very much saw my mom as like a victim of the situation.
Mm,
And it wasn't until I was 17 and they got divorced that I saw that that was not the case. Right. This was
hmm
very much a self-induced situation. So,
Right.
very much like an addiction
How
almost to
so?
being a victim.
So
So
just
so
to
she
add some color.
yeah. So she has actually been married again
Okay.
since leaving that marriage with him. And again, it's the same story: the ex-felon, the
Mm,
abuse, the drugs, the drama, right? And she
right.
wasn't raised like that. And that's what never made sense to me. Like she was an only child, really hardworking parents, like gave
Right.
her everything she wanted, like grew up very middle class. She was not raised like that at all. So I was growing up and I was like, wow, that must have been nice. Cause I don't know what that's like. Like, we don't have
Yeah.
food. Like, you had violin lessons. Like, I don't know, we're not the
Yeah.
same.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I don't know. Like I said, I don't know where that came from. I don't know why she has that, but you can very much, even in the way, so we haven't been in contact since I was 17 and she kicked me out.
Wow. That was
But
actually gonna be one of my other questions is what's the
yeah,
relationship like there, but okay.
yes, no. I mean, I
Non-existent.
saw her at my grandma's funeral, which, she
Mhm.
made that all about herself, even though that was a tumultuous relationship because my grandma was like, "What are you doing?"
Yeah.
As you would expect a parent to be like, "What are you doing?"
Yeah.
Um, so no, we don't have a relationship. But when I talk to my brothers, because sometimes they are still in contact with her, it's always, "Oh, your sister's so ungrateful. She thinks she's better than us." Like,
Mhm.
even before, like when I was pregnant with my oldest, she's like, "Oh, now you'll finally understand everything I did." And I'm like, if anything, being a mom has made me not understand anything. Because I
Right.
couldn't imagine. I mean, she would make fun of me for my body. She would make fun of me.
Wow.
Like I basically raised my brothers because they were never around. I mean, I remember, like I said, second grades where my memories really kick in. And I'd be left with my brothers 12, 13 hours at a time, to the point where
Oh,
like so I was what, second grade, you're like six, and I'm
6, 7. Yeah.
4 and 5 years older than them. So they were
Wow.
toddlers, you
So,
know.
so you really had to be a parent at
Yeah.
7.
Yeah. Yeah,
Wow.
and it's so interesting now because especially with my grandma passing, like I am still the only adult in my brother's lives, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah. So all of that to say that the pattern just continued for her.
Right.
And
And unfortunately,
she
you're getting dragged, because she's your mother, you're getting dragged
yes,
through all of
yes,
this.
yes, yes.
And it's
So
crazy that at that again, I said it again before, but that you knew early that
mhm,
this isn't right,
yes.
which is
Oh,
wild because there's a lot of people that have been through scenarios like that you just don't know any better. Oh, I
yeah.
don't know, like, mom hits dad, parents do drugs, this whatever it is, or dad hits
Mhm.
mom, like whatever, it just becomes normal. So
Yeah.
it's wild that you know, for whatever reason, you knew that that was wrong or something was
Yeah.
off.
Yeah, which circles back to like kind of where I was going with that story in the 5th grade, and we got sidetracked, but whatever. So
Mhm.
they're downstairs fighting, right? And
Yeah.
I
Oh
was
yeah.
a
Yeah.
super sensitive child when it came to like crying, right? Like I cried
Mhm.
all the time about
Yeah.
stuff. So they're downstairs fighting and I'm upstairs crying because like, my dad had his gun. I'm like, mom's gonna die, right? Like all of this, like I'm hysterical. My youngest brother at the time. So I was 11, so he was 6. He's like, "What are you so upset about?
Oh.
Like what like what's the problem?" And I'm like, "I don't know. Like they're downstairs fighting, someone's going to die." Like,
They're
but
fighting and there's guns involved. Yeah.
he had normalized
Wow.
it. He
Yeah.
had. And that was he's doing great now, thank
Mhm.
God. Both of the
Mhm.
boys are.
Mhm.
But
It's crazy
that
that you
was
even now you refer to them as the boys, not your
mhm,
brothers, not, because you had to take on that parent role.
yeah.
So it's just interesting.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Yeah.
continue. Yeah.
No, no, you're fine. So yeah, that was kind of my thing on that note of normalizing things.
Yes.
But like I said, I mean, it was really unstable. My grandma kind of was like a voice of reason for me. So like I was really good. I'm naturally just like really good in school, like
Mhm.
immediately. Like I just pick up on everything. Everything was just really easy for me. Right. And obviously, I grew up in really low income areas. So, in those areas, that's not necessarily normal.
Uh-huh.
Right. Like, it's not normal to have people that try really hard in school because most people's parents are in some form absent for
Right.
some reason or another.
Right.
So, I was just always really good at school. Like I would do like math workbooks on the weekend for fun. Like I would like literally like play like education games. Like I thought it was the best thing ever. I was like, this is amazing. But for me, like my grandma always told me because she was raised in a very tumultuous situation. She was the oldest of 9. Of
Right.
course, she was a boomer. So back then things were just really hard and rough. And so she was just always like, you just have to make it to 18. She's like, you just have to
Right.
like work hard in school, get to that point, make it to 18. You're going to be out. It's going to be fine. Like, you just have to make it to 18. So that was always my mentality, is that like how I was in school was going
Mhm.
to be how I got out of that whole life, right?
Okay.
Growing up in these areas and around so much victim mentality. And just the violence and the danger and all of the things that come with that. And then for me, like obviously, like I'm mixed, right? I'm Ecuadorian and white, my mom's white, and so my maiden name's Alexis Merced, right?
Mhm.
So I got made fun of a lot in school, especially
All right.
elementary school, for being white with a Hispanic last name, right? That
Yeah.
was very much like I got made fun of for that a lot. So
Well,
by
so,
5th, go ahead.
oh no, I was just gonna say, so because you're talking about where you're growing up and where geographically, where was it? What was it
Oh my
like?
God.
Just, I mean, you did brush into it a
Yeah.
little bit, but I'm just to paint the
Yeah.
picture a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. So that actually is a complex question in itself because I actually switched schools 14 times
Oh
while
my.
I was in school,
Oh.
um, because of how much we moved.
Oh my
So
God.
I lived in Virginia.
Okay.
Like in my childhood, I lived in Virginia, I lived in Las Vegas, and then I lived in different parts of Pennsylvania, kind of like about an hour or so east of Philly
Mhm.
is the city where I was born. And then we kind of like hopped around the different ghettos of
Okay.
Allentown.
Right.
So yeah, so I was constantly moving. I was always constantly like the new person. Um, so yeah, that's where we were raised. And we joke now, even though it's not funny, that like Allentown's kind of like this like collection of the people who were in New York that like just couldn't afford to live in New York anymore.
Right.
And like they just kind of like funneled down to Allentown. So there's a lot of like drugs coming through Allentown. There's a lot of
Okay.
people who came there from different areas. Like I said, like my dad's from the Bronx.
Right.
So,
So
he go
sorry, I was just
ahead.
gonna say, so far from the white picket fence, green
Oh,
grass.
yeah.
Yeah.
My high school has a 30% graduation rate. There's a daycare in my high school.
Wow.
Because that's just how common that is there,
Wow.
like my
30%.
Aunt Bev, I used to laugh so hard because when she would drive from like where she lived into our area, as soon as she hit like the border of it, like she'd lock all her doors and like, like put up all her windows and stuff. And I was like walking the streets, like whatever, because that's what I grew up in.
Yeah, you don't know what. Yeah.
I live just north of Birmingham now, and my in-laws, like my husband was raised like upper middle class, right?
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes they'll make comments about like, driving through certain areas. And I'm like, I'm more comfortable here, like
Yeah.
in these areas than I am like living in the suburbs like we are now.
Right.
So yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, locking the doors during you're driving through.
Well, that's the
Honestly.
thing too, because like,
Yeah.
and I think that kind of goes back to the whole conversation of like normalizing
Yeah.
these things, because like when I was growing up, I was very much like I'm gonna have a normal life, right? Like I'm
Right.
eventually going to have a career, and I am going to go to
Mm,
college, and I am going to live in the suburbs, and all these things are going to happen. And you are surrounded by people who never even consider that, because that's just the attitude there. And if you
right.
do, people are like, you think you're better than
Better than,
us,
yeah.
or, you're crazy, or whatever it is. So by middle school, I got very aggressive. You could say, because you had to be,
Yeah.
right? Like you
You
very
had to be
much
willing to
had to
fight
be.
for it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. So
that,
that like sensitivity, that crying all the time thing, like that was shut down. That was not
mm,
happening anymore.
right. And it ties kind of into our last conversation with being able to see it and see what you want.
Hmm.
And it's interesting that you're able to see this picture of what you want in your head, even at such a young age, that you knew,
Yeah.
even in middle school, like, hey, this is what I'm going to do. In middle school, I just still wanted, I wanted a girl to like me. I wanted my friends to like invite me for a sleepover. Like if that was happening, like that was the best day ever. I wasn't worried about, getting out of into certain area, careers, jobs, none of that, right? I mean, yeah, you kind of dream about it, but it wasn't
Hmm.
even, so it's interesting that you had that vision so early.
Yeah.
Um, so I guess continuing on that path of growing up, what do you think would be like the worst scenario that you're in growing up?
So when we lived in Vegas, that was really hard, because like I said, my grandma was always kind of like my voice of reason. Like we would go
Mhm.
over there on the weekends, and it was like besides school, it was like a safe place to be, where like I didn't have to be on all the
Mhm.
time. Like I didn't have to
Mhm.
be taking care of everybody all the time.
Right.
So when we moved to Vegas, that was February, my sixth grade year.
Mhm.
And we lived there until February, my freshman year. So, one, just like that distance, right? And then that was also like, that age, right? Like
Mhm.
11 to 14, like a lot of things are going on for you at that age. A lot of things are going on, like, in friend groups that age. But that was, so my dad, he had done like heroin and stuff before we moved there. But
Oh, wow.
when we moved there, like at the beginning, he kind of got into meth. And then
Oh,
like my mom used to find like crack pipes in like my bathroom, like
oh
stuff like
shit.
that. Like it was really like hardcore drug addict. Like it wasn't like he was
Wow.
like doing blow here and there, right? Like my dad was like, oh, like to the point where, one, I can't believe he's still alive, right?
Yeah.
Like I didn't think that man was going to make it to 50, right?
Yeah.
He's like 57 now. And two, by the time I was an adult, it was hard to have a conversation with him, because his brain's just that far gone, you
Wow.
know. So really hard drugs. And like he'd run through the house, and like, because this was back when people didn't have cell phones, right? All over
Mm.
the place. It was all corded phones. So
Yeah.
he'd run through the house, rip the phones out of the wall so no one could call the cops while he was fighting. So I couldn't call the cops when their fights started.
Oh my
And then
God.
they would just have like the craziest all night long fights. And that was when my older younger brother, right, the one that's 4 years younger than me, that was when he started realizing like really hard what was
Like,
going on. And he took it really hard. He still does.
right.
He still does take it really hard. So,
So these fights, were they just, again, for color, were they like verbal? Was it physical?
oh,
Was
they
it
were
both?
physical.
Oh,
Oh, they were super physical. Oh yeah.
holy,
Oh yeah. There was a point where like somebody stabbed somebody. Like I'm talking
what?
like fist fights like all the time. Like
Are
my
you
like
kidding me?
Oh yeah, like I still to this day don't know how we never got removed from that house.
No,
The
I
amount of times
honestly,
the cops were there, like with all the physical abuse, that never having food in the house. We never had food in the house. So
wow.
like there was points where we lived in Vegas where like me and the boys lived off of like a bag of pretzels, like these big bags of pretzels you'd get from like the 99-cent store for like a
Yeah.
week,
Oh
like,
my
or like
God.
bags of potatoes and stuff. Like it was hardcore between the neglect and then they were just so wrapped up in their drama with each other
Yeah.
that they weren't around. And when they were around, it was always crazy, right? It
Right.
was just always craziness.
So I was going to ask, what kind of emotions during that time, and maybe there, looking back, there were some, but from the sounds of it, it sounds like you just had to put up the defense, shields
Hmm.
up, we need to survive. This isn't
Yeah.
about feeling. Your survival mechanisms kicked in and said, no feeling, survive. We need food. We need to be safe. I need to protect my brothers. And that's it. So,
Yeah.
or was there moments of like, okay, right, my defenses are up and then now this is stopped. I can feel this, or did it just, the more it happened, the more you just became barricaded and barricaded?
So I think I became kind of desensitized to what was going on in the house because
Right.
at that point I had gotten really into like I was cheering, I was doing dance, like I said, I was in school. I would join any activity I can to not have to go home, right?
Of course. Makes
So
perfect sense now.
yeah, so I was just constantly in stuff. I got my first boyfriend, and I got really close to two of my middle school teachers, and I would go hang out with them at their house with their kids. Um,
Wow.
so in Vegas, right, you can like go to like a magnet high school, right? So it's not just like you're zoned for this school, you have to go for this school, which is what I had dealt with my whole life. And when you're zoned for low income areas, like you can only go so high up in schools like that,
Right.
right? So I was like, oh my gosh, now's my chance, right? Like I'm going to high school, I'm about to create this whole world for myself. Like this is my chance to get things. So I ended up getting picked to go to a school that was about 45 minutes away. That was an international baccalaureate program, right? So it was essentially like college level
Oh
stuff in
well.
high school, right? So, I worked hard. I got into the program. I was in the program. I was finally like in a place where like I could thrive and I felt challenged and like I had all these opportunities and I made all these things for myself. And then one day out of nowhere, where my parents were like, we're moving back to Allentown, So I would say that obviously there's a lot of things that happen in my childhood, right? But
Yeah.
like I distinctly remember like that moment, like I like one of my, like I said, I got close to my middle school teachers. One of them offered to keep me so that I didn't
Wow.
have to leave, right? Because I knew what Allentown was. I knew what I was going back to. And I knew that I was never going to get the type of opportunities that I had gotten there back where I was. And
Wow.
it was just devastating. I spent years like my long-term vision, like building this thing up. And then, despite them and all the drama and everything, and then they were just like, no more, like this is gone and that's it. And I'd say that like that's kind of where things like shifted for me. Like I don't want to say where like I gave up hope, but I lost sight of the vision as much because I was like,
Right.
I don't know how I'm going to do this now. Like I don't
Right.
know how I'm going to do this going to Allen with a 30% graduation rate. Like
Hmm.
I just I yeah, there was definitely that was definitely like a massive emotional and mental hit for me.
Wow. Yeah, it's such an interesting thing because it's one thing to have a vision, have a goal, and whatever, and overcome challenges as they come,
Hmm.
right? That come your way that are up to you to overcome. But it's a totally different thing when you have somebody else pulling you back
Hmm.
to what you don't want. Not to mention somebody who's supposed to be caring for you, supposed to
Yeah.
love you, supposed to be supporting you, and I say that, yeah, they're supposed to. Like, I don't, any parent, you should be feeding your kids as best as you
Yeah.
possibly can, right? Like putting as much, obviously there's limitations, but the scenario you grew up in clearly wasn't supporting that. not to mention
Yeah.
your parents at the time not, you know, facilitating or even helping or even allowing for that. So it's
Yeah.
interesting, so yeah, definitely I can see where you lost sight of that, because now it's like, oh my God, my whole, there's my lifeline and you guys just cut it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So yeah, definitely a lot there. And I find it interesting that you know, were able to open up to these teachers, and thank God for these teachers that even just gave you a glimmer of hope
Yeah.
that somebody out there, there are normal adults, and I'm gonna, or normal adults, but somebody that's not fighting and doing all these heavy drugs that actually will listen to me and cares about me. So thank God for those people, because can you imagine, you clearly had it rough.
Hmm.
If you did, even then sometimes just you have those fewer people that'll help you along the way,
Yeah. And
so
I
that's
think
amazing that you had that.
well, that's the one thing. So like the last time I actually told this story, I was in a church group, right? This was
Mhm.
like 4 or 5 years ago, before COVID and all that. I was in it with my husband, who was my boyfriend at the time. And we were supposed to give like our testimony, right?
Mhm.
So that was mine. But my whole thing was the whole time, like, if you look at any point in my life where anything negative was happening, I was always sent people
Yeah.
to support me in some way
Yeah.
during that, whether it was my grandma or the
Yeah.
teachers or a friend. Even like I said, I got into the International Baccalaureate program. Well, I didn't go to school the day those applications needed to get turned in because my
Right.
dad was missing. He was in a hotel somewhere doing drugs. So my mom kept us home from school so we could go find him. And
Wow.
my boyfriend at the time was the one who turned in the application for me so that I could get into
Wow.
that school. So
That's amazing.
always, like in my entire life, like whenever any of this is going on, like I've always been sent people
And
that bring some sort of support.
I love that. And I love that well, the biggest thing I actually is that you recognize that. And I think
Hmm.
there's a lot of people, when we're going through the muck, when we're going through the shit, life's just hitting us left, right, and center. We're getting, from all angles, it feels like it's hard to recognize there is still things in work for us. I've heard this from other people on this podcast, is we're never going to be given more than we can handle. Even at the moment, it seems like too much. We're not given more than we can handle. And two is for you is just recognizing, like, now that there were people there, and
Hmm.
not just cutting them off. Oh, everybody, and buying into that, and falling down that trap of nobody cares for me. Nobody, you were able to have that fortitude, that
Hmm.
emotional and a mental fortitude, that you could recognize that there were some things in play that were good and that you could hold on to. Because the unfortunately is where I find that where it slips, and I've heard it the other way, is
Hmm.
when that you don't have that. You don't realize,
Yeah.
like, or when you have those things, but you don't recognize that those people are actually really trying to fight for you right now, but you're not allowing it.
Hmm.
Right. So that
Yeah.
was really that's amazing. And yeah, and again, quite a powerful story. So um
So on the note that you were on of like the being able to recognize that, that's kind of, I think, what got me, why everything was different for me is like, I was always very much like, this isn't fair. Like this is BS, like
mm,
I'm smart. I work hard. Like I
mhm,
should not have to deal with this. Like I should not have these people pulling me back. Like all these other people who half-ass things, get born into
right.
different families and things are easier for them. So I very much had that and that resentment.
Mm,
But at the same time, especially like around like 5th grade on, I used to get like, I don't know, like I was just one, I was, and this is going to sound like crazy, but like I was really grateful to be born in the time that I was born in, right? I remember watching like Iron Jawed Angels with Hillary Swank, and it was about like women fighting for like the right to vote. And I was like, oh, it's so great that like I'm born at a time where like, we can, be amazing, or like hearing what people are going on, like what was going on for people in like other countries, and be like, oh, I'm so lucky that like I was born here and that like I
mhm,
have these opportunities, or I was so lucky that I was born with like just being naturally good at school. Or
mhm.
people talk about pretty privilege, and that's been real for me my whole life. So like it was always both, right? There was always
Yep.
part of me that was like bitter and like, this isn't fair. But then there was always that other part of me that was like, things could be so much worse. Like things
Yep.
could be so much worse. And like, thank God they're not, you know?
Absolutely. And it's, I've said this so much is that, and you think of, well, there's a few topics combined, but one that you were grateful,
Hmm.
right? How many people do we know that live great lives, amazing lives, and they're not grateful for them,
Yeah.
right? Because you can hear it, how they talk and how they, because of who they are and by knowing them. So you weren't grateful, or so you were grateful. And when in terms of the meditation side, and this is kind of me going back to my stuff, is that
Hmm.
when you have that vision of what you want and you have that gratefulness and gratitude in your heart and love for your own life, right? Those are the two key ingredients to making these things in your life happen,
Yeah.
right? Again, the reverse being this is my goal, I want to do this and this and this because screw my parents, they're the worst. They're this and this and this and this, and anger,
Hmm.
right? It's not the recipe for success. It's not going to bring you those things, or you're not even going to allow yourself to see these things when they come.
Yeah.
So it's super cool that were able to do that then,
Yeah.
and to help you move out of that time and move to a place where those things, I'd say, no longer affect you, but now you've moved beyond that,
Hmm.
right? You didn't get caught in that trap,
Yeah.
right? Which is such a blessing and
Which a lot of people get caught in. I mean, I know
totally.
like this story will sound extreme to like some people, but
Mhm.
like around a lot of the people that like I grew up with, like they all have the same story. Like they all
Yep.
went through the same things. A lot of parents on drugs, a lot of
Hmm.
neglect, like honestly, I wasn't even like, I remember meeting my husband and like our first date, he went on for like an hour because that man just talks nonstop. He went on for like an hour about his life and how it was so great and like blah, 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 blah. And by the time he was done talking, I was like, we have nothing in common. And I don't think this is going to work. I was like, we definitely had way different lives up to this
Yeah.
point. And he was actually like the first person who I'd ever spent time with outside of like that bubble,
Right.
So yeah.
Absolutely. So, it's amazing that you have met your husband, moved, have the life that you have now, and you are helping people with your podcast, Audaciously Aligned, which is a amazing podcast. There's some really great stuff out there. I've listened to quite a few of them and really enjoyed it. You are coaching now,
Hmm.
right? So what would be some, looking back at your life now at those things, what did those experiences teach you?
Everything, right? I mean,
A
it's
lot.
so crazy. It's so crazy because like I remember there's this book called Journey of Souls by Dr. Michael Newton. And one of the things that he talks about is like we choose the families that we're born into.
Hmm.
And one of the lines in there was something like, you can fit a lifetime of wisdom into a childhood of adversity, right? Like being
Right.
born into like this
Interesting.
family of adversity. And I remember having conversations with people in like their 40s when I was like 17 and just telling them my stories and being like, you've lived so much life, like you've experienced so many things. And that's
Yeah.
so like big for me because
Hmm.
one, I'm not worried that I'm not going to be able to deal with anything, right? Like I
Hmm.
said, my husband was raised very much the opposite of me, and I wouldn't say it's a weakness, but like when we hit like a big block or like something like that seems terrible happens or whatever, right? Like, the world kind of spits at you a little bit.
Yep.
He'll freak out, right? He'll be like,
Right.
"Oh my God, what are we going to do?" And I'm like, status quo. Like we
Yeah.
just, we're gonna
This is
figure it
normal
out.
waters.
Yeah, yeah. I was like, we've got this. Like everything's gonna be fine. So like
Yeah.
one, I definitely don't feel like anything could happen to me that I'm not gonna be able to work through,
Mm,
which I know gives me kind of that space to be able to like jump where a lot of people won't, right?
yeah.
Because I'm not worried about not making it out on the other side.
I love that
Um,
strength. That's so cool.
yeah, so there's that. There's the fact that like connection, like authentic connection is so like, it's like one of my top core values, right? It's something that I get the most joy out of in life. And for whatever reason, and I think it's because I've been through so many different types of trauma, like I'll meet somebody and like the first night meeting them, like they'll just spill all of their life trauma to me, like the things they're ashamed of, the things
Yeah.
that happen that they don't tell anybody. And I don't know if it's something in like my energy or like they know I'm not going to judge them and I'm going to validate it and all of that. But there's been so many like instances in my life of people who I've known for like a day that I got so like close to in that day,
Right.
and then like moved on. So I get to enjoy those connections with people. And like I said, that's like, I love doing that. Like I love
Mm-hmm.
it so much. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Even recently, so I was nannying for a little bit and there was this girl that she was considering going back to school. She was like on break from school and she was about to start back, but her daughter was like 8 weeks and we met up because she had considered it. And then she was like, no, I decided I'm going to stay home. I was like, that's awesome. Great. And like 3 months later, she just randomly messages on me on Facebook. And she's like, did you ever deal with like postpartum anxiety or like
Mm-hmm.
guilt about like not going like to work full time right away and like all these things that she was dealing with. And one, I was like, oh, it was like my first realization that I was a little bit older than I used to be because I was like,
Yeah.
I'm like the veteran mom now, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I was like the one passing down the wisdom, but two, it was just so nice because like she didn't have like a mother figure to go to for this stuff and I didn't have that either. And like I was able to like kind of help her like feel validated and navigate that and trust herself in what she was doing. So like all of these things that I've had to figure out for myself because
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have somebody else helping me figure it out, like it's allowed me to help other people navigate that. And that's
Mm-hmm.
just like I said, I love that, right? Like I really do.
No, that's amazing. So, looking back at your life and growing up, you look at it, and after this conversation, you can hear like you do look back at it with, I almost want to say love, and
Hmm.
that like just love for yourself, and or rather even just not full of hate and anger and disappointment and all these things that could come because any rational human would say that that's okay to be angry and mad and all these negative emotions about how you grew up.
Hmm.
And that's not how you're approaching this, which I absolutely love. So on that note, then are you grateful for how you were raised in
Yeah.
these tough, okay. And
Yeah, a
then,
million percent. A million
yeah,
percent. I
wow.
look at I a million percent am grateful because I feel like I understand life on a level that a lot of people aren't gonna be able to
Mm,
because
yeah,
I've had to go and like I trust myself on a level
yeah,
that a lot of people
yeah.
may have later in life, but like just don't
Hmm.
innately have because I had to. So like I
Hmm.
said, like even like with my husband, like if things hit us and like he's like shaken, like the fact that I can be like solid during these things, like I'm super grateful for it. And I definitely went through, like you said, like that period of being like bitter and
Yeah,
angry and mad and
of
stuff. Like
course.
17 to 20 was like
Yeah.
my that was
Yeah,
like my
I hear
flip
you.
the switch chaos era, right?
Yeah, I remember being angry at my
So
parents for a lot of stuff.
yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah. So I definitely felt a lot of like bitterness and anger and resentment for a long time. But it was always that both sides. Like I could always see
Hmm.
both sides of it. And I feel like now I'm to the point where I can fully see the other side of it. Like I don't know why my mom was the way that she was, and we will
Hmm.
never have a relationship, but I can see it objectively as like there's just
Hmm.
something not right with her. Right.
Hmm.
Like there's just something not right there. And
Yeah.
like, I don't have any attachment
Yeah.
to
There's no
it.
anger in your
Or
heart.
yeah, or even like my dad,
Yeah.
like he I haven't seen him since I don't know, it was like 21 the last time I
Hmm.
saw him. Plus I haven't lived in my home city in like 8 years, but I
Hmm.
haven't seen him since I was like 21. And I was thinking the other day, and it's just random stuff that pops into my head. I don't know why, but I was like, if he were to get sick and was like passing away, like would I want to see him again before
Right.
he
Yeah.
before he goes? And I'm like, you know, Yeah, I would. 'Cause like,
Wow.
I mean, he's an addict. Like, I don't know why he was an addict. I don't know what he went through, but I know one, he didn't have the emotional maturity or intelligence. He didn't have the literal maturity or intelligence. Like, neither one of them should have been parenting in that situation. But I don't look at it as like, these are terrible people and I think that they should die and I wish them the worst, right? It's more
Yeah.
just like this detachment from it. And that definitely took a lot of getting to know myself to get to,
Yeah.
for sure.
Absolutely. And I said it earlier, but I love that you're able to approach that, that whole past with love and with
Mhm.
kindness for not only yourself, but for your parents. And I find too many of us, and I've been there, been guilty 100%. I've looked back at the things that have happened to them with anger, disappointment, hate, whatever it is, and been, why did this happen? Look for these whys and whatever you're trying to look for to try to rationalize this when, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. It happened.
Mhm.
Right. So to be
Yeah.
able to look back at with love and kindness, and even, like I said, being able to even be willing to, see your dad again, it does say a lot about who you are and how far you've come from that. And I find that really cool. So I guess if you were to meet somebody, let's say a client came to you that was going through the same muck, that parents were fighting, maybe it was a client that lived in that same area or in just in a rough neighborhood, and they were feeling stuck, what would you say to them? What would be your wisdom?
That you don't have to settle
Mm,
for anything. You
yeah,
know? Like, I think that that's one of the things that I saw happen the most in that area is
right.
because of what we're like, a lot of people are raised around, like, everybody's like, "This is just as good as it's gonna get," right?
Yeah.
"This is just what I can do," or like, "This is just the opportunity and it is what it is," but you don't have to settle for
Hmm.
anything, and you should
Yep.
never settle for anything. And anybody for that matter, especially with, relationships and
Hmm.
whatnot. Like, things
Yeah.
can be so good, right?
Yeah.
Things can be so good, but you've got to let them be so good, right? You
Absolutely.
can't be stuck in
Mhm.
in the victimhood. It won't come
Yes.
to you that way. It won't
Abs-
come to you.
Absolutely. And I love it so much because it doesn't just apply to somebody who grew up the way you did. It applies to anybody with any sort of limitations on their life. I know I put my own limitations on my own life, and those are things I've had to work through of, not feeling good enough, not feeling worthy, and break through those and move past those. So, like you said, don't just settle with just what is.
Mhm.
What about what can be?
Yeah.
And again, that can apply in so many ways to relationships, to careers, to businesses, to just giving back, to, so much. Um, no, I absolutely love that. And I love what you're doing. I think it's so great. So I think, I said in the last podcast we chatted about, but that is being part of your superpower is being able to
Mhm.
have that anchor and to be able to have that certainty. So, what a beautiful thing. Any other, parting wisdom that you'd have with somebody or for anybody out there right now?
It's okay to be like a contradiction, right?
Mm,
Like, you don't have to let go of all your anger and all your bitterness and all of that, like, all at once. Like, it's okay to be in your stuff and still be moving forward at the same time.
right,
It's not even only possible, it's like the only way forward, right?
right.
Like I said, like growing up, like I had very much a it's not fair, but I'm super grateful. It life isn't
Yeah.
one or the other. Like, life is both
Yes.
and
You
when
can
you
have that.
let yourself be in that like both and space, that's when you start seeing things clearly.
So you can hold that paradox of good. It doesn't have
Yes.
to be 100% of one or the other.
Yeah, yeah, like, yeah, the
Yeah.
childhood was messed up and opportunities weren't there and stuff like that, a million
Yeah.
percent. But also, like,
Yeah.
everything about, like, so much about who I am, I would not have been without that. So
Yeah.
it's always both, right? You don't have to pick one side.
Yeah. And you know what? Like I said, I love that because sometimes I find we give ourselves excuses to not do something or to move forward or change. Oh, I'm dealing with this, or oh, I have this, or oh, I'm angry about that, or I have this past. And it kind of, again, that buys back into the victim mentality. And again, somebody who's been there,
Mhm.
recognizing like you're allowed to feel that, but still have hope for the future. You're allowed, you can still have these visions and do these
You
goals.
have to feel it. You have
Yeah.
to. If
It's
you're
not a
shutting that
switch.
down, then that's just
Yeah.
gonna keep you back too. You've gotta let both be true.
Yeah. And then what a interesting concept. And I just love how you said it, because that, even just now hearing it, it's like, oh, right. Okay. Like for myself, I'm like, huh, I wonder how many times I've tried to just polarize, I must feel this or I must feel that, or I
Mhm.
can't feel anything bad ever. I only want to move forward. And me and my wife talk about this lots, and like, how do you navigate those things? And then, yeah, exactly. You said you can hold both, and it's
Mhm.
okay. Right. And I think
Yeah.
the difference is that where are your eyes? Your eyes are
Mhm.
pointed to the future, but you're allowing these things that are coming up to just be, right?
Yeah.
You're not necessarily neglecting and shoving them down,
Yeah.
but you're allowing them to just sit, right? You're not
Yeah.
feeding them, because
Yeah,
that's the
you're
other
not
thing. And you're going,
fixating on
yeah,
it.
oh my God, my pain, I mean, this. It's like, okay, this is
Mhm.
just what is right now, but I know what I want, and that's okay. And I can't lose sight of that.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a beautiful message. And honestly, even if no one else, it hits home with them. It hit home with me. So I absolutely love that. And I love what you're doing. Like I said, I love your podcast. Again, Audaciously Aligned. It's very beautiful, and you're doing some good stuff there. And you are, like you said, your life coach now and business coach.
Mm. So I was business coaching.
Okay.
I kind of came out of that a little bit, and I'm wholly focused on the podcast right now, and
Right.
people that I'm just letting people come
Yeah.
and helping them in what capacity they need help in, and just being
Totally.
open to, I tried to like pigeonhole things for so long because you get told that that's what you have to do, but
Yeah.
I don't fit in a box. So,
No. And that's
I just
okay.
let people come.
Yeah, and nobody should, right?
Mhm.
Like, I don't think we're meant to live in those little cages, and that's kind of goes back to what you said: is don't put that cage over your life. Don't
Yeah.
put yourself in that box. Allow for more. So,
Yeah.
what a amazing message. And again, I just thank you so much for sharing this, for being who you are, for seeing the wisdom in all this. And I've said it before, but the most beautiful part about doing this and having people share their story, and you're already doing it, which is so amazing, but allowing people to share their story empowers them.
Yeah.
And I've noticed this with a few people that I've done these interviews with, is after they come to me and they go, wow, that was so amazing, and I feel like I want to do this now and this. And I'm like, yeah, like that's the purpose of all this, is
Mhm.
just, and it's kind of, and it aligns with what you're doing as well. It's like just empowering people to see more than what they're doing right now. Don't put that
Yeah.
box in your life. Recognize that even that your story, these hard times, are actually your superpower. Just you're not
Mhm.
ready to, you just haven't unfolded it yet.
Yeah.
So again, thank you so much. I appreciate you for sharing. And yeah, just keep being you. So I would normally a hug person on the other side, but I can't right now. So I'm gonna give you like a
A
screen
little long
hug.
distance
It's
hug.
hug, yeah, down there in Alabama. And
Right.
awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Appreciate
thank
you.
you.
So thanks again for listening to this podcast. I really appreciate you, and I appreciate you taking the time to listen to other people that have a story that you can learn from, because I feel like we could all use that. And that's, I know what I always try to do is try to learn from other people. So thank you again for listening. I know I really enjoyed this discussion with Alexis, and I know it could have went on a lot longer because she has so much to share and so much wisdom. So if you do want to find her, you can find her at Audaciously Aligned as a podcast. If you are a person right now in your life and you do have some of these stories, some of these lows that you'd like to share and talk about how you've learned from them, I'd love to have you on the show. Please reach out. Again, comment, like, share, as I know it always grows a podcast. And I will see you on the next episode.